To our press center in Seoul. Soon after President Moon ended his historic trip to North Korea, he made a surprise visit to the Seoul Media Press Center set up at the Dongdaemun Design Plaza located in downtown Seoul. Let's connect to our Cheongwade correspondent Hwang Hojun, who has been there for the past several days and several hours as well, covering President Moon's every move. Hojun, the summit has come to an end, and I'm sure President Moon had a lot to talk about when he was briefing the nation.
That's right, Daniel. Just about an hour after President Moon landed at the Seoul Air Base, President Moon stopped by the Seoul Media Press Center and stood on the podium that you see right behind me, briefing the results of his summit with his North Korean counterpart, not just to the press, but to the entire nation. He evaluated his three-day visit to Pyeongyang a significant advancement of trust between the two Koreas. He first thanked the North Korean leader and the Pyeongyang citizens for their heartfelt hospitality and said he held deep and sincere conversations with Kim Jong-un on topics including the denuclearization and the Pyongyang-Washington relationship. President Moon vouched for Kim Jong-un's determination for denuclearization and that he hopes to accomplish the task as soon as possible and focus on the economic development of his country. He underscored some of the main points of the Pyongyang Declaration, namely that North Korea expressing its willingness to continue to take additional measures, such as the permanent dismantlement of the nuclear facilities in Yongbyon, as the U.S. takes, quote, corresponding measures. And through that, he said the conditions and foundation has now been formed through the latest inter-Korean summit for the Pyongyang-Washington dialogue to resume. Daniel, when President Moon was asked about what exactly the corresponding measures mean, he said, while there were oral agreements made between the two leaders, it would be inappropriate to disclose them to the press at this moment, and that the, quote, corresponding measures are some things that must be discussed between North Korea and the U.S., which is why he said the Pyongyang Declaration did not spell out those steps in detail. President Moon did emphasize, though, he thinks it would be best for the signing of a peace declaration that would officially end the Korean War to take place as soon as possible. Regarding North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's visit to Seoul, which is stated in the Pyongyang Declaration, President Moon Jae-in said he hopes to host the North Korean leader before the end of this year, if possible. He asked for the South Korean people's and the National Assembly's bipartisan effort and cooperation to improve and develop inter-Korean relations and to establish lasting peace on the peninsula. We will now have to wait and see what kind of message President Moon will relay to his U.S. counterpart on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly next week.
It's a very exciting time indeed, Hojun. The fact that President Moon visited the press center immediately upon arrival, and I'm sure that was quite a surprise there as well, and we must have had quite an interesting response.
That's right. Now, just to refresh your memory, this is the first time that President Moon addressed the nation at the Media Press Center. President Moon did not stop by the press center that was set up at the Kintex for the first inter-Korean summit in April. And for the second one, he briefed the public, but that happened the day after he held a private meeting with Kim Jong-un behind closed doors. As I said before, we did see the retractable queue barriers being set up, and actually it was quite the commotion. So we had a hunch that he might be coming, but the the confirmation was not made until later on. And even until now, well after President Moon ended his briefing, the venue here has been buzzing with excitement. Many reporters still and right now sending and filing reports to their own respective news stations as we speak. Now, it's also not that common for the president to give a Q&A session, and it was actually unscripted. So many of the reporters, actually there are more than 2,700 reporters here at the Media Press Center from Korea and also 29 other countries. So everybody was very eager to ask questions, raising their hands vigorously, myself included. But basically such a decision to host a Q&A session after his briefing, that kind of shows that President Moon was actually very confident and satisfied with the results of his three-day summit in Pyongyang. Daniel?